All right, there we go. Fellas, welcome to Gabbin' Games. It's good to be doing another interview. Today we are talking to the one and only Abraham Josie RIESMAN. I want to get these two books real quick.
RIESMAN.
God damn it, Maverick, it's RIESMAN. Here's the point. We talked to her about this great book recently, which I adored this book. It totally tore down a childhood hero of mine, but it was necessary. I needed to be told Santa wasn't real. This is the new one, Ringmaster, Vince McMahon, The Unmaking of America. We're going to talk about that today. It is absolutely fantastic. I'll tell you what, man. Okay, so here we go. Here is the great Josie RIESMAN. And I also got your book title wrong. I've been calling it Ringleader, but it's Ringmaster. I'm a fucking idiot.
Ringmaster, yes.
But yes. I may not be bright, but I'm bright enough to know it's a great book.
Bright enough.
I'm bright enough. Yeah, I'm bright enough. I'm not a smart. I'm not a smart, but I'm still a little bit of a mark. So listen. Today we're not doing phone calls, but if you do want to ask questions of Josie, hit me up in the goddamn chat feed there on the YouTube, and I will pick the ones that I see that I think are relevant that we'll get to at the end. But first, let's talk about the book. I'm going to read two things that you wrote on an AMA last week in promotion of the book, because I think both of these things. These should have been on the fucking back cover, because this is like, this is brilliant. So as it relates to Vince McMahon, Josie wrote, due to his totalitarian control over creative, meaning creative over the wrestling business of WWF, for decades, he has been the closest thing wrestling has had to an auteur. And if his canvas was the wrestling mat, his paint was his own psychosexual longings and revulsions. And then she also said, what is the singular takeaway you hope people get from the book? And Josie said, I want people to see the rise of American fascism through the lens of kayfabe and be better able to resist it. Those are both really evocative statements. And honestly, as somebody who has finished the book and loved the book, I think they're both spot on. The one that you're very welcome. The one that struck me as the most powerful, which I didn't anticipate. I know you and I spoke when we were talking about the Stan Lee book that you were writing this. And I kind of figured, okay, you're going to go, it's the story of Vince McMahon. And it is, but can you, without sort of blowing the book, talk about the real issue of this book, which is, this is about America, and this is about how easily fooled we are. And there's so much subtext, or it's not even subtext, there's so much just important shit in this book. When you talk about the generation of men that came up, and obviously now women and everyone, but you specifically talked.
I know there was a period when if you were a teenage boy,
yes,
both in the mid 80s and then again at the late 90s at the turn of the millennium, wrestling was completely unavoidable. If you were a teenage boy in those periods, you knew who Hulk Hogan and, or if you were later, Steve Austin and The Rock were. You know?
But you're absolutely, and you're saying that to be a teenager in the time of, say, the Attitude Era, which is when you were a teenager,
the turn of the millennium,
and I was there with Hulk Hogan, but certainly the Attitude Era, where you get into what you were calling neo kayfabe. That primed a lot of people, you're saying, to be susceptible to someone like, I know people don't like when I get political here, but the book's political. It primed a lot of people to get into Donald Trump.
You don't have to get political. I can be political.
But isn't that right? Don't you think those are the training wheels for Donald Trump?
I might as well dive, you've mentioned kayfabe and neo kayfabe. I might as well define them for people who are not as familiar.
Yeah.
But kayfabe is a word of unclear linguistic origin. It may be corrupted Pig Latin for be fake, which would make sense given what it referred to. For about a century, from the late 19th century until 1989, kayfabe was industry lingo. It was derived from the carnies, but it became industry lingo in wrestling for the fictions of pro wrestling. Specifically, kayfabe meant like don't break kayfabe. Kayfabe was the layer of lies and illusion that you presented to the audience in this scripted faux real, not actually unscripted contest. And not breaking kayfabe meant completely committing to that, not only to the idea that the matches were not predetermined and it was actual struggle for who was the victor, but also you committed to being your character,
outside of the ring.
Right. Inside and outside, you committed to the fakeness of wrestling. And so that was kayfabe. It was a big, flat, solid, foundational lie. And it was the people presenting it saying to the audience, hey, everything you're seeing tonight is real. Believe everything. Lose yourself in the illusion. It was somewhat glorious in its way. And then Vince kills kayfabe in the 80s. Vince McMahon.
In the 80s or the 90s? Because the 80s with Hulk Hogan and Andre. Oh, okay.
1989 is when, February 1989, the New York Times runs a story about Vince McMahon's deregulation efforts for the World Wrestling Federation. And the headline has basically nothing to do with the deregulation push, which was actually quite scandalous in a lot of ways. It was just a big revelation, which was that the WWF had said in a state legislature, in this case, New Jersey, that wrestling was a predetermined exhibition as opposed to a legitimate sporting contest.
Right.
And so, the headline was, now it can be told these wrestlers are just having fun.
Right.
Which was deeply ironic given the fact that they weren't having fun.
Right.
The labor is very backbreaking there. And when they were deregulated, there was less regulation and health and safety standards. But be that as it may, Vince kills kayfabe by doing this legal push and deregulation push in courtrooms and state legislatures, and by sort of pushing the limits of what is believable. Because, when you were watching, when Hulk Hogan was big,
right?
If you were a kid, you could lose yourself in it.
We didn't know. We argued all the time about, there's no way this is real. No, it's totally real.
Of course, it's fake. Right. And that confusion is very productive.
Yeah.
But the product itself, nobody, until 1989, you did not have anybody actually outright saying,
right,
in that era, hey, wrestling is fake in a mainstream big deal way.
Wasn't there?
That happens in 89.
Yeah.
Kayfabe dies, and there are a few years there where wrestling really languishes. And I would argue that that's because when you get rid of the part of kayfabe where people can suspend their disbelief, all you're left with is outrageous fantasy. It's no longer that tension of reality and fantasy. It's just fantasy. And what replaces it, what ends up becoming enshrined by Vince, although he doesn't invent it on his own, is this thing that I perhaps vainly decided to name neo-kayfabe. And neo-kayfabe is when you tell the audience not, hey, everything you see tonight is real. You actually tell them the exact opposite. You say, hey, everything tonight is fake. Don't worry about it. It's fake. All the things you're going to be seeing are fake, except, and then you toss in some kind of tease that makes you think there might be one or two real things that might happen.
Right.
These two guys really hate each other. So when they're having their scripted match, one of them might hurt the other. Or, if you watch this match or watch this promo, you'll get some grains of behind the scenes truth about what's really happening and the backstage drama, etc. And even if you're not getting backstage drama, you're watching the matches and analyzing them as performance and not just as sport. You're looking for I can see past the veil and understand what makes a great match and why this person's doing this. So that neo-kayfabe principle is you start with the presumption that you're telling everyone it's fake, and then you say, but there will be some real things, and we're not going to tell you which of those things are real. And you then are sent into this state of total confusion. Right. Where that what you're watching is fake on some level, but also it's real on some level, and no one's telling you which parts are which. Anyone who watches reality TV will be familiar with this sensation. Reality TV did it after wrestling. And indeed, wrestling has been very conducive with reality TV. Mm-hmm. There have been a lot of successful reality shows with wrestlers because they know how to have that neo-kayfabe balance where you take elements of truth and expand them into lies, or you take lies and you commit to them so hard that they become truths. And that state of confusion for the audience is very pregnant with possibility. Once you have an audience confused and trying to sort something into fact or fiction, true or false, you can manipulate them very easily. They're paying close attention.
Right.
To you.
Right.
And I'll say the last thing, the big essence of how you fool someone in a neo-kayfabe system is you just plant lies just beneath the surface. So people see the surface and they go, "Oh, I know that surface is a lie. Don't, please, I'm educated." And they dig beneath the surface and find this, lie that you buried there, and they go, "Oh, I found treasure."
Right.
I found the real
it's
thing
very
that's actually happening.
Sinister in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Would you say that what you call neo kayfabe, which I think is perfect, although it sounds like a character in the new Street Fighter. I'm just like, that's the one made. But I love it. But would you say that reality TV and wrestling prepared us for Trump, or if it wasn't for those things, people wouldn't be as susceptible to whether it's Trump or QAnon or any of those things?
It's less so that wrestling warmed us up, and more that wrestling presented tactics that were then adopted by other people.
Because Trump was a fan. Trump was watching this when Vince's dad was doing it, right?
Exactly. We have people on the record talking about watching McMahon family wrestling with Trump when Trump was a child in the 1950s, when the company was being run by Trump's grandfather and father.
Right.
And Trump has been a diehard wrestling fan. I shouldn't say diehard. I don't know exactly how extreme it is, but he's been a very close observer of the art of wrestling since then. And he was a participant. In 2007, he did that whole angle that led up to WrestleMania's Battle of the Billionaires.
Well, he's in the Hall of Fame, right?
Proxy wrestlers go, and he's in the Hall of Fame in 2013 after his, disastrous racist 2011 presidential push.
Right.
He still in 2013 was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and he's still there.
So, okay, and you actually spoke to some of the aides that worked with Trump, correct? And you were saying...
Yeah, I spoke with some people. A lot of people didn't want to be named or identified because they don't want to be known to be talking to me or talking to somebody who's writing a critical book about Vince, because Vince is a major Republican figure, as is especially his wife, Linda. But I did speak on the record to Sam Nunberg, the campaign advisor, from the 2016 campaign, a very influential guy. He was the person responsible for Build the Wall. He was the one who came up with that concept. And I interviewed him, and he talked about how during the campaign, there were only 2 people in the world whose phone calls Trump would demand to take in private, as opposed to putting someone on speakerphone to showboat, which is his usual way of doing things. He would talk in private to 2 people, and those were Mark Burnett, the producer of The Apprentice, reality TV, right. Incarnate, and Neo Kayfabe, and Vince McMahon. It was Mark Burnett and Vince McMahon. Those 2 he would take the calls from, and everybody else had to get the humiliation treatment. But those are 2 people that Trump holds in very high esteem.
Right.
And they both are people who, like Trump, have mastered the art of making you so confused that you can't help but pay attention.
How conscious do you think that tactic is for both McMahon and specifically Trump? Is it?
I think for McMahon, it's more deliberate, although a lot of it is instinctual. I think he just knows how to push people's buttons, and couldn't necessarily write down exactly what those theories are for him. Trump, I don't think, thinks about it at all. I think Trump just realizes that when you put in certain inputs, you get outputs from a crowd.
Right.
And that's something he learned while watching and then participating in wrestling. But I don't think, again, he could tell you what his technique is.
Right.
Burnett, I think, actually could probably tell you what the technique and the theory of manipulating reality are.
Yeah, which is scary, but cool. But
very scary. Mark Burnett's somebody who I don't actually know a ton about, but what I know is very
well, apparently the tapes he has with things that, let's put it this way. There was a day where I would have said the tapes he has based on what we think Trump said. Nobody cares. Nobody cares.
A, nobody cares, and B, they would just say it's a deep fake.
That's right.
There's nothing you can do about it.
Or even if they said, no, we know it's true, we don't care. It doesn't.
The window for that is passed.
That's exactly right.
We'll get to that later.
Okay, and which is why we go back to this. Your real goal here is to see the rise of American fascism. I mean, your take is that Trump, and if you watch a Trump rally, and I think you mentioned this in the book, it is so similar to watching somebody standing
working a pro wrestling crowd.
Absolutely.
Especially if somebody is in the Steve Austin or The Rock mold, where they're a jerk but they're a jerk to people you don't like.
Right.
And specifically, they're a jerk to lame people, you know, to people who are good. And that mode of being kind of a bad guy who is loved by the crowd is something that Trump excels at. You know, I have a friend who likes to point out that we'd all be a lot better off, including Trump, if Trump had just become a full-time wrestling professional, like wrestling personality,
right,
and just done that instead of running for president. I think he would have loved that, but alas.
Right. Oh, well, you know, history. So I want to talk briefly a little bit more about kayfabe, because like I said, when I was a kid, it was real. I remember, and in fact, in your book, I think, who was it? It was the Iron Sheik, right? And there were two guys caught in a car.
I saw Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik were caught driving together with a bunch of drugs and alcohol. So they were pulled over. And Vince didn't care about the drugs and alcohol or the fact that they broke the law. He was mad that they were a good guy, a babyface, and a heel, a bad guy, caught associating, which was a total violation of the laws of kayfabe. Even though at that point, Vince was going out of his way in like legal and legislative settings to identify wrestling as fake, but you could only violate kayfabe on Vince's terms, not on your
own. So we go from that, then we get to neo kayfabe, and now I don't know. I mean, I've seen through your interviews, you got back into wrestling with the book, and now you're on to the next thing. But I'm
not totally on to the next thing. I'll tell you, I'm still so deep in wrestling. I thought I was done, but this book rollout has got me thinking about all this new other wrestling stuff.
So it never ends. The drama never ends with just Vince.
It never ends. I was at WrestleCon, the annual convention that happens around WrestleMania, and a number of great ideas for like other books or articles just sort of fell into my lap, and I was like, I guess I'm not done with wrestling. Well, plus I want to do a sequel to Ringmaster at some point.
I heard that because I mean, even I saw you do an interview where you said, it's like the origin story, the backstory of the villain.
McMahon begins. This is McMahon begins. We get McMahon coming into his full flower as who he becomes. And then the next volume, which would be from 1999 when we leave off in Ringmaster, up until he's no longer with us. My guess is I would only do this sequel after his life has run its course. I want it to be the full story. And the idea would be it's McMahon Begins, and then the second one would be God Emperor McMahon. It would be what happens when the heel wins, when the heel conquers the world. What does that look like, and what do people do about it? And that story is not done. Like, Vince's mother lived until she was 101. She died last year. So, Vince could have a lot more life left in him. I have no idea what the arc of that story is, but I know there's a story there. And I've done a lot of reporting for it because I thought this was going to be a book about Vince's entire life. So I've already interviewed a ton of people about things that happened after 1999. I just don't have the space yet.
Well, yeah. So the book goes to 99, but it also does, just for people who are watching that are considering reading it, because there are a couple final chapters that do deal all the way up to last summer.
There's an epilogue at the end that's pretty robust and gives you the signposts of the most important things that sort of happened afterward. But it's in the context of like, this is the fruits of what happened, and of the story you just read. There's still so much more to say, especially about Vince's family. One of my regrets was I didn't have enough space to talk about Vince at length, and then also talk at length about Shane, Stephanie, and Linda. There was just only so much word count I had before this book would get so long that an average reader would be like, a wrestling book that long? No bull.
I was surprised to learn from your interviews that you were under contract to deliver a limited number of words. I didn't know.
Yeah, that's pretty standard.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no. And some books, they'll let you slide a little bit, but this one, I respect the fact that it was pretty strict, because I do think if I'd put out a phone book sized, Power Broker, LBJ, Robert Caro type thing, you would have had a lot of mainstream readers who are not interested in wrestling going, maybe it's interesting, but I don't have the time for that. You want to have something that looks manageable that you can read on a couple of flights.
I never would have thought about that, but yeah, it totally makes sense. So the kayfabe thing fascinates me, because now neo kayfabe was brilliant in the 90s, early 2000s, but just like I think it's fair to say you talk a lot or a little, but it was a big effect in the book about how cable and pay-per-view and all these technologies kind of came along.
Those were really disruptive.
That's right. And the internet, though, I think the internet probably has killed neo-kayfabe.
Well, it's made neo-kayfabe even more intricate because now you don't get it from the promoters directly. You get the storylines through tweets and, you know, anonymous leaks to the dirt sheets, you know, to newsletters. That's where the storylines happen. Neo-kayfabe has gone to the point where it's not even just the stuff being intimated in the show. It's all of the information you get from other sources building you up. So when you're watching the show, you're like, oh, there's that guy. I know he's been, you know, caught cheating on his girlfriend, or maybe he's been caught beating his girlfriend. He's a real bad dude. And it may well be that information was allowed to be leaked because it would make you dislike this person who's a heel even more. You know, that's the kind of stuff that happens. I do agree that neo-kayfabe has changed its shape since the end of the Attitude Era, really, you know?
Right.
And I don't mean to imply that it's been static since then. I do think it's still the neo-kayfabe system where, to a certain degree, even though you're not these days necessarily very often getting these big reveals of truth, the stuff that really juices people up is the desire to see beyond the veil, to not just see what's happening in the ring and go, wow, that's really exciting, I loved this, but to go, I understand this. See, you know, this person has had a long career where like X, Y, and Z happened. They got screwed by the WWE or at this point, then they came back. You have to know all that lore, and the WWE will give you some of it, but they are relying on the fact that you're getting all of this other stuff from other information sources, which leads to this total blizzard of information, misinformation, and disinformation that I think we can relate to in politics as well.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. For me, I got into wrestling. I didn't care for it as a kid.
Yeah, I didn't either. It wasn't until I was a teen.
Right. I didn't care for it then. I thought it was stupid. And it's only in my 40s, now I'm 50.
It's only recently you've actually gotten into it.
Because people on my stream were telling me about it, and I'm like, oh, fuck it, I'll watch it. And I was at a point in my life.
I thought you were saying you were aware of Hulk.
Oh, very much. I mean, yeah, the Goonies.
You just weren't a watcher. Got it.
My friends were watchers, and they wanted to always play the games, so I played the games with them, and they always wanted to wrestle in the backyard.
Okay, you were aware of.
But I was like, guys, this is stupid. You know, the difference is
that's one of the genius moves of Vince McMahon. The genius / possibly evil moves is to make wrestling a multimedia enterprise.
Sure.
It used to be like a live event that had sort of a television
with the closed circuit thing, right?
Not even closed circuit. I mean, like in the early days, it was just a live event. Then with the advent of mass television ownership in the 50s, it becomes a big television thing. But even then, the television shows were sort of an afterthought just to get you to come to the live event. Now, WWE exists in so many platforms that you don't have to watch wrestling. You have a lot of people who haven't watched WWE in years who will still religiously play the WWE video games.
Right.
And that's how they interact with WWE. And you have people who don't watch wrestling or play the video games, but were huge fans of Total Bellas. You know, the reality show starring the Bella twins. Like, there are all kinds of ways that Vince has made it possible for you to engage with WWE content and IP. You know?
Yeah, I mean it's impressive, and it's, you know, it's worrying, but it is what it is. So yeah, I wasn't really into it as a kid, but when I got into it, I was surprised to find, like, I just loved it, right? I knew none of it was real. Like, I follow a bunch of the wrestlers on Twitter, and it's like, yeah, okay, Bailey, you're really a bad shut up. You know, it's dumb. Right. But I still enjoyed it. And I remember when Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair and Ronda Rousey, there was a run there before WrestleMania where they fought, and I was so fucking in. And then over the summer, though, I saw them at Comic-Con, and they were doing a thing about the Mattel action figures, but they were outside the door before they went into the room. The minute they stepped in the room, they changed character, but you can see it on YouTube. Outside the door, they're just talking about, oh, what did you do last night? I mean, it's, and I'm fucking 50, and I'm like, I didn't fall for it, but my lizard brain fell for it.
you don't know, it's fake, and that is something that comforts you, but also does not explain anything. It gives you a sense that, like, oh, it's okay for me to watch this violence because the violence is fake. That's the important part about it being fake.
Right.
That's the important part about why Vince and wrestling in general have never front loaded that it's fake. You know, you don't turn on Raw and have them start out by going like, hey, everybody, so we all know this is all fake, but let's watch the show. You know, they still commit to the bit, at least on the textual level.
Right.
And that's because you need people to think it's fake so that they don't get worried about the fact that these wrestlers are ruining their bodies and risking their lives every night with no health insurance provided by their employers.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
With low pay. I'm serious.
Oh, I know you're serious.
Of the deregulation push, because they would say, we're fake, so we don't need health and safety standards. Would you have health and safety standards for, let's say, the Harlem Globetrotters or the circus? Those were the examples they always used.
Right.
And my response to that would always be sort of, well, yes, those should also probably be unionized, and some of them are, but wrestling, not so much.
Yeah, I was amazed when I learned that the wrestlers actually drive themselves from one venue to the other and book their own hotels. And I'm like, you know, if I'm Vince McMahon, I get you may not want them to unionize. That's tough shit. They should, but I get it. But what I don't get is like you're risking these incredibly. If you just look at it like a businessman, like Vince thinks clearly, you're risking these.
This is where you're wrong.
How?
This is where you're wrong. I'm going to correct you. Vince likes to say he thinks like a businessman.
Okay.
He doesn't think like a businessman. He thinks like a wrestling promoter, which is a different breed of cat that is like not what you think of as a traditional businessman. A wrestling promoter is constantly in a war with the boys, the wrestling roster, be they male or female,
right?
The locker room. It is always a constant vying for dominance. Now, that's not healthy, and I don't think that's how things should be.
Right.
But it's deeply embedded in wrestling that you humiliate your wrestlers. Literally, that's it. You have. I just want to say, you know, Vince learned all this from his father, who was a wrestling promoter of great note and renown, but who was a total jerk to his wrestlers. You know, and he once said to Vince, according to J.J. Dillon, who Vince said it to, he said, "I just talked to my dad, and my dad told me wrestlers are like seagulls. All they do is eat shit and squawk all day." There's a real antipathy towards the employees, not just the wrestlers, but everybody beneath him, that Vince has inherited from his father and from his father's cohort and their forebears as well.
Do you think, though, because all throughout the book, there are a number of cases where people who worked with Vince's dad and also now work with Vince, and I was so surprised that with all, I mean, these guys did awful things, and I want to talk specifically about some of the stuff Vince did, but you've got a lot of these people defending them and saying, oh, absolutely, Vince Sr. was, his son was a piece of shit.
I think the essence is what Jesse Ventura said in this one interview that was sort of obscure, but I found, and it was a complete dynamite quote. He said, of Vince Sr., he said, I think the exact phrasing is, he would stick it to you. Even when he was sticking it to you, he made you feel good while he was doing it.
Right.
He was talking about a time how you would like go in and negotiate with Vince Sr. for more money, and Vince Sr. would make you feel like $1 million, but would not raise your fee by even $1. You know, you would just walk out and be like, wow, that was a great meeting. And then you would realize that you had completely lost the negotiation. And that's how Vince Sr. operated, you know.
Out of all the wrestlers you looked at, and I know you didn't really, or maybe you did, but in the book, the only one that we really get to know you interview was Bret Hart.
Yeah, I interviewed a lot of wrestlers, but Bret Hart was the one who had the most compelling story when it comes to Vince. Because he had a real father-son relationship with Vince.
Which one do you think, though, whether you interviewed them or not, it was probably one that was able to sort of navigate Vince's bullshit to such a degree that it was in their benefit? Like, because the way
the only one I can think of is Shawn Michaels. The only one I can think of is Shawn Michaels, and it didn't work forever because Shawn Michaels was an unstable wreck for the period when he was on top. You know, he was an addict. This is something he's documented very extensively. But while he was in that period where he was on top of the world, he was one of the only people who ever successfully kind of brought Vince to heel, or at least made Vince go along with what he wanted to do. Now, there are a lot of people who raised these sort of homosexual rumors about them, saying that Vince was sleeping with Shawn, and that was why Shawn was getting this bump. But I think, or push, I should say. But Dave Meltzer, I interviewed about that, and he was like, look, it was as simple as the fact that Shawn was the best wrestler they had. And the thing was, Shawn knew he was the best wrestler they had, or one of the best. They had Brett as well, and they had a few other really good guys. But Shawn knew he was such a valuable asset with the crowd that he could threaten to walk to the rival, Ted Turner's World Championship Wrestling, at any moment. And he sort of banded together a few other guys, and they had the closest thing that wrestling, or at least mainstream wrestling, has seen to a union. And it wasn't a union, but it was the closest thing you've seen to one in a long time. You had this small clique of guys who indeed called themselves the Clique, and they all were sort of had this mutually assured destruction where they were like, you have to give us what we want, because otherwise we'll go to WCW. And for a while, they kind of got what they wanted. They were basically booking a lot of their own matches. They were the ones determining what was going to happen.
Right.
And this really irked a lot of the other wrestlers. But I would say Shawn, because he was, and also Shawn, probably because of his addiction at the time, he was not afraid of Vince.
Right.
He was much more reckless. A lot of other people were more reticent to tick off Vince because they could recognize that was a losing game. Shawn had some advantages, but also just, I think Vince admired the fact that he was so ballsy. He would just demand things of Vince. But even then, Shawn, by his own admission, would then like call Vince and like apologize for being too forward. Everybody was on some level afraid of Vince. They both love and fear Vince in differing measures, but both of those things are there all the time.
Got it. Would you put it past Vince? This is the last thing I want to talk about kayfabe, but I'm just,
sure.
Because if you don't keep throwing gasoline on it, it probably dies. And I think about your story that you actually broke about the first female referee who accused Vince.
I didn't break it. It had been reported by Geraldo Rivera.
In
1992 in a very salacious way. But nobody had ever talked to her in 30 years. And
so you did an interview, was it the New Yorker with her?
New York Magazine.
Okay.
Correct. And
this is a woman who
she was the first female referee in the WWF, as the company was called back then. And in 1986, she was hired in 1984. And then in 1986, according to her name is Rita Chatterton, her story is that Vince raped her in the back of a limo in 1986. And then she gradually stopped working for the WWF and eventually came forward in 1992 with Geraldo Rivera. She appeared on 2 of Geraldo's shows, Now It Can Be Told and the Geraldo Rivera Show. And it was presented in this very unprofessional manner.
Right.
I mean, it was trashy daytime TV. It was not the highest journalistic standards, but she did come forward with her story, and Vince sued her, and the story basically just went away, and she went away. She was unheard from in the press for 30 years. And then I tracked her down and spoke to her, and she features prominently in the book, but also I did write a profile of her for New York Magazine last summer. And sorry, tell me your question.
Well, no, and I appreciate the background. I assume everyone's read the book because it's great, and I read it and I know everything about it.
Not yet.
Yeah, I know, but it is a New York Times bestseller, though. Congrats on that.
Thank
Fantastic.
You. Wild.
Fantastic.
I just saw the cover that my publisher is using for the 4th printing, which has a little gold belt on Vince that says New York Times bestseller.
Oh, that's very cool. That's very cool.
They couldn't find another place to put it, but it's a perfect place. Anyway, keep going.
Well, right. So, how do I put this? Would you put it past someone like Vince McMahon? I mean, we won't put it past someone like Donald Trump to do the most selfish, awful things to get ahead. I mean, I don't think that rape was kayfabe, but would you put it past him?
To manufacture something like that?
Because that's, like I said, you got to keep putting more gasoline on that fire.
I doubt that, because he tends to... They have reacted negatively to the accusations of sexual misconduct in the past.
Okay.
I don't think Vince is comfortable being accused of that. I think he probably on some level recognizes it as an asset to not stamp out entirely, or at least he recognizes it as something that would be worse for him if he reacted to it now. You know,
Okay.
I think, I don't know. I don't want to go down that road.
Okay.
I'm not willing to entertain that.
I
that much
didn't
of a
read the book and
conspiracy.
think that it was that. I just started. It got my
I know, but
mind
I'm
going
saying,
of like,
I
Jesus.
think, well, here's the thing. I think Vince would not stop at anything in terms of the depiction of his character of Mr. McMahon on television. You know, I think
Right.
these days he's mostly retired the character, but back in the day, around the turn of the millennium into about 2007, about 2007, when Chris Benoit had his murder-suicide incident, and the content really cleaned up a bit. But from like 1998 until 2007, Mr. McMahon was a character that they were constantly trying to push to new extreme lows.
Mhm.
And I think Vince finds it very advantageous for him to have that reputation on television, because I think it lessens the blow of the fact that he's accused of such things in real life.
Right.
You sort of feel like, well, that's old news. And once you're thinking that's old news, you're not doing anything about the story.
Right. Okay.
So I think that's the extent to which Vince might be seen as a mastermind, in that I think he wants to continue to portray his character, or at least wanted to portray his character, as a sexual predator, in a way to kind of inoculate against the accusations that he is an actual sexual predator.
Right, which is such a obvious bit of sleight of hand.
I know, but most people, now more people are catching on to that.
Right,
but very few people have.
Right, so now you got to ratchet it up and find new techniques to fuck with people.
And you have to, go ahead.
Well, no, I'm sorry.
No, this is all great.
I just like if I tangent. I have ADD, it doesn't matter. Look, let's focus. So the point is, Vince McMahon. A big theory, I think it's safe to say, of yours in the book is that a lot, if not all, of his motivations that make him sort of a junkyard dog to achieve success, and maybe through success, love and acceptance, is the desire to get love from Vince Sr., who in his mind, I guess, never really loved him or cared about him. Correct? I mean, is that an accurate read?
I would say, yeah. The more interviews I've done, the more bold I feel in kind of laying out that subtext. But yeah, I think, in my informed guess, not having interviewed Vince, and not necessarily trusting what Vince would say in an interview anyway, I think it seems likely that Vinnie Lupton, as he was known when he was a kid, being raised by his stepfather because his father wasn't in his life for the first 12 years of his life, Vinnie Lupton was a pretty nice kid. Vince has tried to portray his youth as being a rough and tumble one, where he was a juvenile delinquent, constantly getting into violent incidents. But I found absolutely no evidence of that. I talked to a lot of childhood friends and acquaintances, and administrations of schools he went to, and nothing. He was a pretty nice kid by all accounts. What really changes him, the first times you start seeing him doing things that some might call unethical, are after he starts working for his father, and especially once he assumes his father's mantle, once he actually becomes a wrestling promoter himself. Because initially he was doing odd jobs for his father, and then being a ring announcer and commentator for his father. But in 1982 and 83, he makes these 4 installment plan payments and buys the company from his dad. And then he really starts to act like his dad, turned up to the max. And I do think that Vince, at a young age, really longed for a father who was not his stepfather, because his stepfather was, by his account and by other people's accounts, very physically abusive and frightening. He wanted a father who loved him. At 12, he meets his biological father. Side note, only because his biological father's second wife sort of bullied him into it. But the father and son meet, and Vince Jr. basically spends the rest of his life to this day trying to make that father love and respect him. And I think that motivates him much more than any petty ideas about wealth or power. I think it's, if that were what was motivating him, if wealth or power were what was motivating him, he'd be much quieter. He would not be forcing himself back in the boardroom, in an executive position. He would be sitting back and counting his money and collecting more money.
Right.
But that's not what motivates him. I think what motivates him is wanting to be the top dog, like his father was, and thus to get his father to love him, or at least something like that.
Do you think that because I was struggling with this, and I don't know if you know, but do you think Vince is unusual in that way? Like, a lot of people had shitty stepdads or had shitty fathers that didn't love them or whatever,
Sure,
but they don't become villains. But maybe a lot of them do, and it's just that Vince and Trump and all these guys are on the world stage, and so we see they're playing it out.
It's that with the story of Vince McMahon is remarkable for one reason, one really interesting reason. Well, two really. One is it was in wrestling where everything from private life is turned up to 11 and presented for the world, so you get to see a lot of flaws from the regular world of capitalism,
right,
in grandiose fashion. But also Vince had not one but two bad dads, one who neglected him and wasn't there for him for 12 years, and then afterward withheld any kind of appreciable affection from him, despite lavishing it on this other family that he'd adopted that he wasn't even blood related to. And he also had his stepfather, who was physically abusive and very present in his early life. And I think the 1-2 punch of that, then combined with the tinderbox of power and wealth that he gets from this company, from his father's company, you end up with a very public display of tendencies that I think exist in a lot of successful people.
Right.
You know, people who've gotten to the top and stayed there very often have done so by being less than friendly and less than nice to people and less than fair. It's just that Vince has so much operatic angst in that regard, and has been given the canvas of wrestling. So that's just the way we see it manifested. You know, ways that other people act in private, Vince has acted in public. Doesn't make him unique because he's feeling those things. It makes him unique because he told us all about them.
You've written 2 books now that are really taking these, you know, I don't want to be dramatic, but sort of sacred cows of pop culture, and kind of said, this is horseshit. What you've been told is horseshit. Have you been surprised and disappointed by these revelations, or have you always been, you know, dialed into?
I don't know. I was pretty skeptical. Especially after having done the Stan Lee biography.
Right.
I knew to go into a biography very skeptical of your subject's accounts of things that they were the only extant source for, you know, especially about their young life. You know, with Stan, the big coup was that I got to speak at length to his brother, Larry Lieber, who had seen a lot of things that nobody else, literally no one living, had ever seen, had also seen. And here it was a lot of little, I didn't get one Larry Lieber, but I had a million little Larry Liebers in the form of all the people who knew Vince growing up.
Right.
You know, the advantage here was Vince isn't as old as Stan had been, so there were a lot of his peers still alive and willing to talk to me.
Right.
And wait, now I can't remember what the question
well,
was.
it's just I was saying that it's like there's this very disappointed.
Oh, the
sense.
disappointed
It's
thing.
like,
I don't see myself.
Hey, Josie's got a new book out. Prepare to fucking be depressed for a fucking week because you know what? Is Spielberg next? You gonna fucking tear Spielberg down next?
Hey, I've got some beefs with Spielberg.
What? Tell me.
Well, it's mostly Jewish politics stuff.
Oh, okay.
Inappropriate to discuss on this podcast, but.
Nothing's inappropriate.
Spielberg's grandmother, or maybe it was great grandmother, is from a shtetl right next to the shtetl my family's from. So maybe there's old beef between our clans.
There you go.
But the point is, I don't think of it as being, I'm not trying to do hatchet jobs. I'm not trying.
That's why the books are dangerous, because these are not hatchet jobs. These are really fucking well written, well sourced books.
I try to have empathy for these subjects, no matter what they do.
I know. I'm being a bit of a.
I know you're not.
I'm being a bit of a heel, man. Let me be the heel.
I'm not getting on your case. I know. I wanted to say.
No, I love the books, and I think it's necessary. Look, I think we're, as much you wrote something. I don't know if I have the quote, but I gotta find it. Was brilliant. You wrote something in the book about the collapse of it's like you were comparing kayfabe to the way a lot of us used to view America, and like that sense of patriotism and
the way it was. Well, I said this in a few places. I don't even know if I said it in the book, but this is such a rough generalization. Please, political scientists, do not base anything on this. But you used to have a big flat kayfabe lie about America, which was this is a representative democracy and the will of the people is being enacted in government. Now, this was not true for a lot of reasons,
Right.
but it was a useful fiction. It was a useful fiction in a lot of ways that sort of sometimes obscured the truth, but sometimes worked us towards a better truth.
Right.
And what we have now is a neo-kayfabe system where, like, politics no longer has that everyone's cynical. No one is going in going, this is a representative democracy. Right, left, center. Everyone is going in saying this system completely doesn't work right now.
Right.
Like, everything is broken. I'm a critic. There are very few people who are saying the system works right now, you know? And that's the difference. Everyone's going, this is fake. This is fake. Even when our politicians say everything's hunky-dory, I don't believe them anymore.
Right.
But I have to pay attention to the signs to try to figure out what actually is real.
Right.
And then you get completely confused.
Well, that's why I do love the book, and I was just kind of teasing a little because I do think we have to wake up. And I do think the more we talk about it and the more we recognize, it's like, look, you can, I don't know why you would, but, you know, teach their own. You can love Trump all you want, but love him for the right reasons if you actually do love him.
Know what you're actually loving.
Right, exactly.
Can we, I hate to be rude, but can we go to questions? I'm very eager to hear what people think.
Yes, but I have two more I have to ask, and then I will go to questions.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll give you a preamble first. The preamble is very brief, which is when I made a couple of games. I made a game called Twist Metal Black, and then I did a game God of War. Both of those were in the exact same time. One came right after the other, and it wasn't until I was done that I was able to go, oh, I didn't even know what these fucking things were about, like subtextually, right? But they were about a lot of things that were about me, right?
I know that feeling.
Right. Well, and so I look at this book, and I look at this book, and I love them both for very different reasons. You're welcome. But I look at them, and they're basically about people that are living a falsehood, a lie.
And forget that it's a falsehood and sort of fall into it.
Yeah, well, yes. And then there's a sense of you going, I'm going to reveal the truth. Now, both these books.
As I can.
Sure. But both these books are being written, and certainly this one is being researched and written. You actually say that wrestling in your Polygon article, or actually this was an AMA, but that wrestling sort of prompted you to transition.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
And I just look at both these books and go, how much were you, like, it seems there's a relation there.
Sort of trying to rip past the surface and see what's
and go,
really
yeah,
going
what's
on.
real? And it's like, this is bullshit.
That's very interesting. I actually hadn't thought in those terms. I was thinking about it in a slightly related way, which is that gender is a kind of kayfabe, and that's not bad. I love kayfabe, like good kayfabe.
Right.
Good kayfabe can inspire. I mean, religion is a kind of kayfabe. It's a tension of the rational and the irrational, fact and fiction, much like kayfabe. And I think you have to have kayfabe. So similarly, you have to have gender, even though at the same time you have to recognize gender's kind of made up. Like it's a social construct. But at the same time, it's something you feel very deeply and that you love losing yourself in, whatever your gender affirmation mode is.
Right.
And that was a big factor. But it was also spending 2 years living inside Vince McMahon's head, 2.5 years. You know, I on some level was like, he's the most machismo macho guy you can possibly imagine. And it gave me this real window into masculinity in a way that I hadn't had even in looking at myself. But eventually, by looking at this other set of masculinities, you know, Vince's and other people's, I came to look at my own differently. And I thought, if other people want to do this, sei gesund, but I do not want to be a part of the male thing anymore.
Right.
I just saw it and went, this isn't for me. You know, I saw it at its you know, not reductio ad absurdum, but, you know, it was extrapolated like it is in wrestling to this huge caricature. And I just thought, if that's the aspiration, then I don't want to be a part of it. So
interesting.
You know, the transition, I transitioned like the week that I came out, I should say, like the week that I finished the first draft. And those two things were not unrelated. But I like what you're saying. This idea of like, I wrote 2 books about trying to claw past an illusory front and find out who the person underneath was. And
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I was doing that with myself.
No, I mean, that's like I said, that I found that in the work I did, and not that it was about that, but it was about family and all this stuff, and I was just like, I didn't even know what I was doing.
No, I know. That is how the brain works.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Ruminating on things, and sometimes the things you're ruminating on, they just become the water you're swimming in, and you're not even aware of it.
Okay, last question before we go to questions from the audience. Yes. So the book deals with a number of sort of bad situations in the WWE and in wrestling in general when it comes to sex and underage sex that Vince was aware of, most likely. Yeah. And then you talk about, in your Polygon article, you talk about, wrestling has always been, sort of almost like there's kind of a
queer subtext. And there are queer, not as much subtext isn't even really the right word, because that implies that people are trying to convey it.
Right.
It's more that there are queer elements that even the practitioners of this art form are very much not aware of a lot of the time.
Right.
And the big one, I think, there's the obvious things. It's, barely clad men touching each other while wearing bright clothing and talking really loud. Okay, so that's the obvious thing. We can go like, wrestling's a little gay. But I think the more important thing is you have men, big, strong men, showing weakness. That is the sine qua non, the fundamental thing that you need for a wrestling match to work. It's not strength, but weakness. You need to have somebody, one of the combatants, able to convey that whatever the other combatant is doing hurts them. You need to have both of them doing it really to make it work. But ultimately, you could have a wrestling match that is just one person who has no strength walking up to another person and poking them in the chest, much as happened once in WCW in a much maligned moment. But you can poke them in the chest, and as long as the person who gets poked goes, "Oh God, my chest, it hurts so much," and shows weakness, shows being in pain, shows not being in control, then the match works. And the fact is, we don't tell, I mean, I guess I don't educate kids these days. I don't know what we're telling kids, but at least when I was coming up, we did not tell boys that they should show weakness, that they should show pain, that they should show vulnerability. That was something that was seen as kind of queer in a bad way. And I think it's actually queer in a good way. I think that a lot of the best queer theory is about exposing your vulnerabilities and, being in communion with people in a way that allows for pain and allows for suffering. And truth. I think wrestling really does that in a way that is not necessarily textual and oftentimes runs totally counter to the values of the people who are doing it. That's one of the magical, weird things about wrestling.
Right. What I'm wondering, though, is that in the book, other than Vince McMahon, who comes off as very much like a creep, but he's a straight creep, as far as we can tell, most of the sort of sexual deviances in terms of like pedophilia and all this stuff in the book, or like was it Hulk Hogan that was like, hey, you got to give me a blowjob if you get
no it was the opposite. It was Pat Patterson, who was then implicated in the Ring Boy scandal that you've been alluding to. Pat Patterson, according to Hulk Hogan, very viciously sexually harassed Hulk Hogan on the way to Hulk Hogan's first match,
and said, give me a blowjob.
Pat Patterson and another wrestler who's of less note. But and then Pat Patterson was one of the three people who was sort of implicated in the Ring Boy scandal, where underage, part-time hands from local communities, young boys, were getting raped and molested by men at the company, allegedly. And Vince very likely knew about it. He admitted as much in 2 interviews. But the point is, I mean, this is the thing. Not every queer person is a good person. Not every queer person does good things. And it's really unfortunate that the Ring Boy scandal, which remains one of the darkest chapters in wrestling, was a homosexual scandal.
But do you find, or would it be safe to say, and maybe this just got what I from reading your book, but there's a lot of, whether it's closeted or not, it's certainly closeted from the public. There's a lot of homosexual wrestlers that keep it.
Sure, there's a lot of queer. I mean, in a beautiful, good way.
Right.
I love that in the past decade or so, and even just in the past 5 years, especially, you've had a real preponderance of queer, trans,
Mm-hmm.
whatever wrestling organizations, little leagues
Sure.
that sprout up. I live in Providence, Rhode Island, and our local one is in Boston, the Boston League of Wicked Wrestlers, Blow, BLOWW.
Okay.
And they just take anybody who's not a cis man, and
Right.
it's beautiful.
But the
that
WWF or WWE, do you think there is
WWE is not moving that direction anytime soon.
not publicly? I'm saying that in the book, I'm like,
are there
wow,
people there?
a lot of these stories in the book are about men with men or men with boys, and I didn't see a lot of stories in the book when it got into that about, other than Vince doing that horrible rape scenario. I was just curious if it was like, oh yeah, dude, if people knew, there would be a lot of problems for the marketing.
I think sexual assault is sexual assault. I don't think it has anything to do.
Oh, of course. I'm not saying it's because of that. I'm saying, does that industry attract more of that type of sexual assault?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right, great.
I don't think that's
that was just what was in the book. It just focused on.
No, I know, but I think the book is just about the wrestling industry. But I think if you look into any industry, you'll find.
Got it. That makes sense. That makes sense. Tragically,
positions who try to get away with sexual misconduct, often involving, homosexual misconduct.
Gotcha.
Unfortunately, this is the thing about wrestling: is it has the problems of every industry, but it just, for reasons both, embedded historically and that are more accidental, it just happens much more operatically.
Yeah.
You hear about it more.
Okay, fair enough. All right, I have a million questions, but let's go to the audience. Wooden's Throne, thank you for that, buddy. He says, anything that had to do with Vince Russo buried wrestling, buried wrestlers, and buried and company he was in. Let's not forget the Brawl for All. I don't know what I know Vince Russo is a big figure in the book. He's one of the
Vince
bookers.
Russo, I again, word count. I wish I'd had more space to devote to Vince Russo, and I wish Vince Russo had talked to me. He said he wouldn't. Unless I did a paid interview, and I wasn't going to do that. He was not unique in that, I should say. There were a lot of wrestlers who said they would only do a paid interview, and I kind of get it, because wrestling doesn't have a pension, so you got to make the scratch where you can. But the point is, Vince Russo, I'm not going to go out of my way and say Vince Russo tanked wrestling. I do think Vince Russo is a key figure in the development of neo kayfabe, like one of the most important figures. In that he really recognized that you can push people's buttons by messing with reality and getting them to wonder whether what they're seeing is real or not. That's something that can really grab people. And I think neo kayfabe has been corrosive. So I wouldn't say he tanked the industry, but I do think he's a major figure in the development of a lot of forces that have, been difficult for people.
Got it. Okay.
And the Brawl for All is a disaster. That was, the non-scripted boxing thing, or, fights that led to really just rough injuries. I mean, it was a really ill-conceived idea that led to disaster.
Somebody's asking, Mr. K is asking your thoughts on the Endeavor acquisition. I mean, so Vince.
Ari Emanuel. Oh, Vince, yeah.
Well,
Vince cut a deal with Ari
yeah.
Emanuel, who already owns, in his Endeavor Holdings, already owns UFC, Dana White's UFC. So Ari bought, this is not the term, they're saying it's a merger or whatever, but, Ari Emanuel and Endeavor will have 51% of this new entity that will incorporate UFC and WWE together. And it's a real change. I mean, Vince has not shared power pretty much ever before. The closest he's come to sharing power is sharing power with his wife, Linda, which is a very, and that's a difficult, weird relationship. But it's unique and not the same as Vince's relationship with, say, Ari Emanuel.
Right.
He does not really have much of a, close kinship. We've been through everything together kind of, feeling towards, as he might about Linda. So if you scratch Linda off the list, because she's pretty unique, Vince has never really shared power. The closest he came to that was when, in the brief period where he was in charge of the company, but his father was still alive. He took control of the company in 1983, and his father died in 1984, a little around a year later. So there's this period where Vince Sr. still has the power to walk out and denounce the WWF, which would have been a pretty, devastating blow. So he would threaten to do that, and Vince would have to sort of talk him down, but never gave an inch to his father, and eventually his father was pretty upset with his son, but kind of went along, realized that he was on the outside. He had not negotiated properly and didn't really have the power, and went along with what his son wanted. And I don't see that kind of thing happening with Ari Emanuel either.
Well, so you're saying Ari Emanuel Endeavor has 51%. So ultimately they have final say, right?
Right. That's the thing. I mean, they did this interview, Ari and Vince, on CNBC, where they were talking about this plan, and the interviewer said, "So, what's going to happen if you two disagree about something?" And Ari said, basically, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was basically, if there's not unanimity, we're not doing it. If there's something that one of us wants to do and the other doesn't want to do, then we're not doing it. Well, good luck with that when it's something that Vince wants to do.
Right. So what do you think his motivation was?
Like that. What's that?
What was Vince's motivation then? I mean, did he just need the money? Why would he do this?
No, it's not. I think it's he wants to be the top dog. And I think, ironically, he's gotten to be the top dog over all of his enemies at WWE, the people who kind of tried to force him out, and successfully got him to sort of step back for a few months. I think he's trying to assert himself over them and just show the world that he can do whatever he wants to his company, and that he doesn't care. I think money is part of it. He likes having money because the money allows him to have more authority over people. But I think a lot of it is just about doing something that ticks off his enemies and benefits him, even if in the long run he has to navigate around Ari Emanuel. I think in Vince's head, I could be wrong, but having written this biography of him, I think Vince plans that he's going to have to break Ari Emanuel, and he thinks he can.
And basically, he'll take over Endeavor or something.
That's the thing. I think Vince may well be thinking, yeah, sure, we're going to come to an impasse and I'm going to win.
Right.
And I'm not actually going to have to give up any power in this arrangement.
Right.
So
do you see sort of a UFC, WWE, Marvel, DC crossover, or they're just, they're so different.
They're very different, but at the same time, WWE is constantly trying to position itself as something resembling a legitimate sport, as evidenced by the fact that they're trying to get gambling legalized for wrestling.
Oh, God, yeah.
Trying to lobby in certain states to get people to be able to gamble on the results of wrestling matches, which is completely out there.
Right,
that is something that I would not have anticipated.
Yeah.
But at the same time, maybe I should have anticipated it. It makes total sense that you'd want to horn in on this bonanza that is sports betting. And why not cut a deal with DraftKings where you claim that you're going to keep the result of this match totally secret, and therefore it's just as good as if it was, an unanticipated outcome. It's just nuts. But anyway, yes.
No. So back to your Polygon article, which I just thought was so interesting. The idea of being a tween teen boy in the 90s and looking to the wrestlers of Vince McMahon as sort of the beacon or the North Star of masculinity, do you think that has shifted today and it is more UFC? Do you think most 12, 13-year-olds are not really looking?
Yes, I actually think this is the interesting thing about the UFC merger is Vince won wrestling, but he kind of lost combat sports. Like UFC, he had an opportunity allegedly to buy UFC for a song early on and passed it up. And now MMA is a more lucrative global enterprise than wrestling has been. I think Vince recognizes on some level and doesn't necessarily appreciate it, doesn't like it, that he did not win in the battle for televised combat sports. That UFC kind of did. And I don't know, I don't know how this new arrangement's going to work. I have no idea if there will be crossovers. My guess is there will be like cross promotion, but I don't know if that means more Brock Lesnar's or whatever of people coming from MMA or to
Just put
MMA.
Rousey back in the MMA and see what happens.
Put Rousey, I don't know.
Oh,
Maybe there's all kinds of opportunities here for spectacle and confusion.
Yeah. All right. I know you've got to get to an appointment. I got a million more questions.
I apologize.
But no. But seriously, the next book, I heard you were doing something with music. But
it's a biographical sketch of the musician Beck in the 90s.
Okay.
The long 90s.
Right.
And it's called Hollywood Freaks. I'm just starting on it. So
okay.
That one won't be out for a while.
But we might see a sequel. We might see you still in the wrestling world.
I'm hoping to do a sequel to Ringmaster, but that, again, I don't want to start that until Vince's life has sort of reached its conclusion.
Right.
And I don't know when that's going to be.
Well, I can tell you, I don't know if you play the WWE video games, the 2K video games.
I'm not much of a gamer. But
okay. Well, I didn't play them until last year when they had Rey Mysterio as the cover. And I didn't know they did this where they're doing sort of documentary style storytelling and then they go into the gameplay. And the MLB, the show just did it with what they call the Negro Leagues about like Satchel Paige and all that. And I'm just like, dude, after reading your book, I haven't wanted to make video games again since I got out of it. But I'm just like, after reading it, to make a documentary, playable documentary about the beginnings of wrestling all the way up until when Ringmaster ends.
Hey, if you want an advisor on that,
I will give you a call. Idea. I will give you a call.
That game would do gangbusters.
I bet it would. All right. Josie, thank you so much.
I just want to tell people, ringmasterthebook.com is where you can find the book.
And I will stick around after Josie leaves. I'll be giving away a free copy that I'll send you today.
Thank you.
Of course, in the chat. So be well and continued great success with this wonderful book. And I will speak with you soon.
Much, David.
All right. I will see you. All right, fellas, there you go. Let me go right to the chat. I hope, Man Cave, you got your question answered. I didn't call you out, but I was referring when you were asking about the future of the WWE and the UFC. I have not read any of the chat, so I really don't know what you guys are talking about. So let me see what you guys want to chat about, if anything. Rob the Mod's excited. He loves Beck. The Montreal Screwjob was real or neo kayfabe. My understanding from reading the book, it was absolutely real. And even when they admitted things were bullshit, that they always were like, no, this was the real deal. Why can't Vince stay retired? I don't know. Because he probably don't want to. He wants to, like he said, he wants to kind of run this shit till the day he dies. Look, man, let me tell you something. I see you guys in the chat going on about, Trump, why is he talking about Trump? Because the book's about that, okay? Literally, Josie says in their AMA over on the Reddit, he says, where is it? On the Reddit, Smurfy X asked, he says, what is the singular takeaway you hope to get from the book? And Josie says, I want people to see the rise of American fascism through the lens of kayfabe and be better able to resist it. So, look, you guys know I have tried to tamp down the politics on the fucking stream because I know a lot of you folks would rather not hear about it, and I have a different channel for that, and that's fair. But that's what the book's about. That's what the fucking book's about. In its essence. And it's great. It's fucking great. All right, fellas, let me let you know what's going on. I do appreciate you all being here and watching and hanging out with us. Thank you. Shiva Jones says, I love this interview. Thank you. I appreciate that. So the next interview we have coming up in a couple of weeks is the director of the Resident Evil documentary, about George Romero, the film director, horror director, who made obviously Night of the Living Dead, bunch of wonderful movies after that. Apparently he was hired by Capcom to direct the first Resident Evil movie. He also wrote the screenplay, which you can find online, or rewrote one of the screenplays. That guy's coming on, the director of the documentary about Capcom firing him and that whole story. So that'll be happening in a couple of weeks. And then I can't tell you who we have lined up after that, but it's a pretty big name. You're going to love having that conversation. In the meantime, everything that's been going on the last 2 weeks have been very few Gabbing games. That's not because I've been sitting around smoking the pot. I've been doing a lot of adjustments and changes to the show and the membership tiers and all that. So Monday, I thought it was only going to take a week. It's taken 2 weeks. Monday, we should be back to normal with very, very regular shows. So Trump was complimenting China's president, Kim, and Putin in his interview. He was. I mean, again, like Josie and I were saying, I don't care if you like Trump, but at least know what it is you like about Trump. Because, yeah, that interview with Carlson was insane. I don't know if the stream just froze. You can still hear me. Hopefully you can still hear me. There we go. But that stream with Tucker Carlson where he literally is going on about how great these dictators are. What? What are you talking about? The Zeke says, here's Trump is not a fascist. Biden is closer. Zeke, I don't care. There's no blinders on. Literally, you can watch the interview where he is praising these guys. Bacon says, Jaffe, have you been reading more books and playing games? No, I've been reading this one. I don't know what's happening with the stream. We're having some issues. So if I'm still recording, thank you guys. If not, thank you guys anyway. I appreciate it. I will see you guys later. Yeah, that's weird. That's weird. Hang on. Let me. All right. Well, who knows? All right. I think something went weird with the stream there. I'm not entirely sure what, but anyway, thank you guys very, very much for hanging out with me. I appreciate it. And I will see you guys soon and on the next stream. Thanks, everybody. Bye.